we have been dealing with a totally new area. We've been trying to help an investigation based on a single signal once an hour from an aircraft that didn't include any GPS data, any time and distance information. So this really was a bit of a shot in the dark, and it's to the credit of our scientific team that they came up and managed to model this. And they managed to find a way in which to say just a single ping can be used to say the plane was both powered up and traveling, and then by a process of elimination, comparing it to other known flights, established that it went south.
Hello again, buddies and gentle buddies. We're not going to waste any time with intros or anything like that. We just want to point out that this is the second half of an earlier video, and we're going to try to pick up exactly where that one left off. So try to check out part 2A first if you'd like to see the whole video back to back. So, picking up directly where we left off, let's look at some of the communication equipment and how it might relate to all of this. Anyone who participated in the heated discussion surrounding part 1 knows that one of the absolute best asked questions is, why didn't the pilots send out a distress signal? Why didn't they call for help? Well, you guys know that a huge element of this theory is the possibility of an engine explosion or some type of failure that caused a compromise in the structure of the fuselage. And we all know for a fact that debris from MH-370 has been found, and as we pointed out earlier, a huge portion of this debris came from the right-hand side of the plane. So the suggestion is that this debris might have conceivably been torn or broken off of the main body of the plane by this possible engine explosion or a rupture in that location. And if this is even remotely possible, then we should also look at where the communications equipment is physically located on the plane as well. Because if that debris really did cause enough damage to that area of the plane in mid-flight, then there are more than a few scenarios where the communications equipment could have possibly been damaged as well. So first we'll show a video clip from an electrical equipment bay tour showing the location of some of these systems on a 777.
It's located under the floor of the cabin where the passengers are. This is in the forward end near the flight deck or the cockpit. What I'm looking around now is, see, those are the floor beams for the cabin. They're graphite fiber composites. Looking forward, up the side of the forward wheel well where the nose gear goes. And so that's the box. This is the computer that one of the computers that I use to troubleshoot the airplane. It's connected to the data bus, which talks to all the systems. These are electronic racks. They're separated electronically as well as physically, so there'll be some on the right and then another system that does the same thing on the left, so that if one side gets damaged, the other side will still be functioning. And they each have their own, like I said, electrical system as well as physical separations. Those are the heavy power feeder cables. These are the main power feeder cables that come from the engines and the APU. Those are run in a single run from the APU or from the engine generator all the way into this area in one single piece. You don't splice those like you can, and there's no connections or break, what do you call those? Terminal blocks or anything like that. It's all one solid wire from the generator to the distribution panel. These are different wire runs. Some of them are electrical distribution for actually electricals. Others are data for data. There's some fiber optic ones in there. They're separated depending on what they do, because some of them, like the heavy power cables you see, those are separated by themselves. You can't run those with communications cables because the electromagnetic field that emanates around those is so powerful that it would disrupt the communications. This is some creeping forward into along the wheel well, getting under the cockpit. These are some of the control mechanisms and rigging that come down from the cockpit controls for flying the airplane. We have the 777 is a fly-by-wire. These are the autopilot servos that move the controls when the autopilot is engaged. There's a spring. You can now, for the pilot, he can override the autopilot. It takes a lot of force, but not impossible for him to do. If he needs to, the autopilot won't disengage. This is all the way in the forward nose section. Got some guy in there doing some work. We're having quite a bit of work done, a lot of inspections done, so we got people stuffed everywhere in the airplane right now.
So a possible scenario that we could be looking at is a large hole or an opening caused as a result of a structural failure torn into the side of the craft, stretching back from along the side of the electronics bay. It's not as far-fetched as it might initially seem either. As we pointed out earlier, even something as small as a bird strike has the potential to cause significant damage that, along with other factors such as altitude, speed, cabin pressure, etc., can ultimately result in somewhat of a domino effect that ultimately leads to subsequent failures of surrounding areas, in effect causing the hole to expand, basically. So what we're showing here is a few excerpts from the waypoint hypothesis. We're taking a good bit of information from this hypothesis, and we can't recommend strongly enough that anyone who's truly interested in this subject, for them to read it from beginning to end. There's a link to it in the description, but here's a quick look at just a few segments from it to hopefully pique your interest a little more. What follows is a post about the brains of the 777. They seem to be at the heart of how someone could possibly make a 777 disappear, and this post will serve as a background for such speculations. So as you can see, they do a great job of breaking down different parts and elements of the quote brains of the plane, for lack of a better term I guess, such as what they're calling the cortex and the nervous system. They give a great explanation of how these things really work. And they also briefly go over the triple redundancy systems, which is really worth looking at by itself. But before we go too much further, a big part of this is the ACARS system. Now, Wikipedia describes ACARS as an aircraft communications addressing and reporting system. So it's basically a digital data link for transmission of short messages between aircraft and ground stations via airband radio or satellite. Now, this is relevant because ACARS is designed so that it cannot be turned off unless someone knows precisely and specifically how to do it. And someone would even have to go down into the computer area and remove some of its key components. So the question is, how could someone realistically do this during mid-flight without being challenged or confronted in some type of massively significant way? Here's a news clip from 2015 when the first official report was made.
CNN aviation commentator Richard Quest. Richard, good morning to you. Thanks for coming on to our show. Let's start off about talking about this report. It must be so very frustrating for the families to see no real new information coming to light here.
Well, this is the report, and it runs to, 109 pages, and then it has another 300 or 400 pages of transcripts from air traffic control. But the reality is, as you were just correctly saying, there's nothing in it that tells us what happens. Mm-hmm. You've really got to sift through. I mean, what they've done is they've ladled everything into it. They've told us about crew training. They've told us, you name it. There's a lot of irrelevant stuff in here that doesn't need to be here. But if we sift for the nuggets, what we do find, for instance, on the question of Captain Zahari Shah, people had said he was unstable, he was having marital difficulties. It says, the captain's ability to handle stress at work and home was good. There was no known history of apathy, anxiety, irritability, or family stresses. So there's no evidence, there's no smoking gun alley, there's none of a pilot who was distressed, depressed and determined to suicide.
And let's stay on that note though, because it said the same thing about the co-pilot and any of the crew, all the crew on board, no suspect behaviour whatsoever. Yet at the same time, don't investigators stand by the fact that the transmission equipment was manually switched off? So how do those two things marry up?
No, they don't. Yes. What they do is, this report goes into, it basically says the main systems, the ACAR system, that's the digital way in which it communicates, the transponders, it says they stopped working. But this report does not use the phrase that the Prime Minister of Malaysia used when he said it was deliberate. So in many ways, what this report does is row back on many of the things that we have taken. They're still there, but they're not as definitive as they had been. What I think this report does do is paint a very poor picture of air traffic control in Southeast Asia on the night. Between Singapore, between Malaysia, between Vietnam, all the countries, many of whom saw on their radar what was happening with the plane and the turnaround. And crucially, hours, and I mean hours, went by before the alarm was raised. That, to me, remains the scandal of the night.
So even the official accident report states that these systems simply, quote, stopped working, not that they were intentionally switched off, as is being widely reported all over the place, it seems. So right off the bat, this contradicts some of the more popular theories about pilot complicity or pilot involvement, and of course there are many other scenarios and possibilities surrounding all of this, even including the official narrative, obviously. But after this video, we're going to continue to dive into this stuff as deeply as you guys want to go. So definitely let us know which of these or any of the other specific topics you'd like to see covered in more detail. And now that we've covered a lot of these newer elements of the story, we're going to go back and add some finer points to a few of the puzzle pieces that we touched on in part 1. So even though we went over a lot of the found debris in part 1 and earlier videos, and we also compared the engine explosion theory to a few other flights that experienced mid-flight failures, but we left out an important piece of debris that we want to go back to for a minute, and that is the known stabilizer debris. Let's compare that piece to similar damage on another flight, Aloha Airlines Flight 243. One of the reasons we want to look at Flight 243 is because another one of the more popular criticisms about the engine explosion theory were people saying things, for example, there's no way a plane could fly with a gaping hole in the side, which, in our case, presumably would have been caused by the possible engine explosion and the subsequent debris. But by looking at the damage on Flight 243, we know that that's not always necessarily true. And specifically, this 737 suffered an explosive decompression during mid-flight, resulting in the loss of life of one crew member and the injuries of 65 passengers, but was still able to make an otherwise safe landing. This was a relatively substantial section of the fuselage that was missing we're talking about. And if nothing else, it shows that a hole in the fuselage, even a big, giant, gaping hole, does not automatically mean that a catastrophic explosion of the entire plane or the instant loss of all flight controls or anything like that is inevitable. It's never 100% inevitable. But we still see that being suggested and pushed what seems like all over the place. And this is important because for this theory to hold water, the hypothetical rupture in the side of the aircraft would have had to have been on the right-hand side of the aircraft, close to the wing. Of course, this would be precisely near the same area where the debris that was found from the right forward landing gear came from, near the computer bay, possibly even the R1 door, and all of this could possibly go back to the lack of a distress call. So here's the debris known to have been found from flight MH-370 stabilizer. And while we're on the subject of debris found, let's also revisit the flaperon for just a minute. We haven't seen very many people mention the fact that the different species of marine life found on the flaperon was apparently from tropical warm waters, not the cooler waters like the location where the plane is currently believed to have impacted the water as per stated in the official narrative. And what we mean by this is that part of the examination of the found debris included analyzing what parts of the ocean that it may have traveled through. They do this through a determination of which type of different marine life species the wreckage had encountered during its drift through the ocean currents. Now, most of these species can be identified by which areas of the ocean that they live in, and what the researchers found is that only tropical species were discovered, with no trace of colonization in the cooler waters where the official investigators suggest that the plane must have impacted. we implore you to take a closer look at the source on this subject in the description, because obviously if MH370 had impacted the cooler waters, as is widely stated, and the collision is what caused the flaperon to physically separate from the main body by either being torn off or broken off, then they would have almost certainly found at least some traces of the marine life species that inhabit those areas of the ocean. And one more detail worth pointing out is the debris that was found near MH-370. And please forgive me if I mispronounced that. But the reason why this is relevant is because the more you look into it, the more you see debris like this washing up on these islands, consistent with pieces of a passenger aircraft, in some cases even eerily so. And while keeping all these little tidbits in mind, all the information that we've looked at so far from the beginning of part 1 up until now, especially the found debris, we're going to read another quote really quick from the aviation author Jeff Wise. No significant evidence of secondary structural damage excludes a massive trailing edge strike and leads the author to conclude that the flaperon separated from MH370 while in the air and did not separate from the wing due to striking water or land. Now, this is obviously extremely important because if there is even the smallest possibility, no matter how remote, that the flaperon or any other debris broke off during mid-flight and not due to impact with water or land, as is suggested by Jeff's research, then that changes everything. And there clearly must be a damn good reason why or how it broke off. So the point is that debris continues to be dismissed by authorities, even though there is a very real possibility that some of it may have come from MH370. And just like the discounted debris that we pointed out in the earlier video, additional debris periodically washes up on beaches and islands close to the Maldives. So if we look at the 3D model of the currents again, it helps illustrate how pieces of wreckage that might have broken off during mid-flight could have easily followed the ocean current patterns and finally ended up directly on these very same islands and beaches in the Maldives and the surrounding areas. So for example, take a look at this piece of the carbon floor panel that was only recently turned in by the families. The official investigator report confirms that this is likely from MH370, specifically because it is consistent with the official narrative drift pattern. And it's not difficult to see how similar in appearance this fragment is to the same carbon honeycomb pattern found on a small piece of debris that washed up on an island in the Maldives back in 2015. So, could these pieces be part of the same floor panel? Could it possibly be from the floor above the electronics bay? I mean, after looking into it, these seems like completely reasonable questions to be asking. And again, the reason why all of this debris is so critical is because if the authorities were to hypothetically confirm that these several species found on the islands of the Maldives did indeed come from MH370, it could blow a huge hole in their official theory that the 777 impacted the southern Indian Ocean and that the confirmed debris is simply the result of a collision with the water. As official investigators state, the southern Indian Ocean drift pattern wouldn't even allow for MH370 debris to travel to the Maldives. This is obviously crucial, and it should definitely be considered when looking into these currents and drift pattern routes. So just look at this map for a second, which shows the location of the islands where the debris was found. It is quite literally in the middle of the same current patterns where the debris would have washed up from, even more so when considering that the proposed engine explosion occurred near the Gulf of Thailand, like we illustrated earlier. And as we've tried to demonstrate, just because debris was found in Madagascar, the Maldives, and the coast of Africa, that does not necessarily indicate that the plane had to have crashed there, or even really that close to it. The current patterns indicate this, the marine life species indicate this, and the time frames all demonstrate that the debris could have easily floated or drifted from the Gulf of Thailand to these precise remote areas where they were eventually found and might even continue to be found in the future. So here's another piece of debris found in MH-370. Does it look like it could match the right engine to you guys? Or I guess a better question would be, does it seem like it could possibly have come from the engine? Well, either way, hopefully by now it's apparent just how relevant and important the confirmed debris is in this situation. Just like with any airline disaster or tragedy, the debris is some of the most critical evidence available. And just to reiterate that point, here's another quote from the official debris report regarding the floor panel that was found in Madagascar. The thickness of the debris and the material it was made of were consistent with that stated on the floor panel manufacturers, the Gill Corporation's, product data sheet, which meets the BMS4-20 specification, and therefore it is almost certain that the debris is part of a cabin floor panel of a B-777 aircraft. The location of where the piece of debris was found, considering that MH-370, an aircraft registered as DM-MRO, ended its flight in the South Indian Ocean, is consistent with the drift path modeling produced by the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization. This suggests that the part is likely from MH-370, given that the likelihood of it originating from another source is quite remote. Yes, exactly. Okay, for now, we'll leave you guys with that information, but seriously, do not forget to check out the sources and read all of the full reports for yourself. And that being said, there's a very high chance that the official theory is correct, but at the same time, it just seems worth looking at all of the information that was used to formulate their hypothesis. If you are genuinely interested in what happened to Malaysia flight MH370, then hopefully you're willing to look at all of the information for yourself. There are so many questions, theories, hypotheses, possibilities surrounding all of this, so chances are that we'll start to cover some of these other theories and ideas before we immediately continue on with the jungle theory. I mean, we'll just kind of see how things go, but we're receiving tons of requests for some of the other theories and explanations, and even some requests for just covering the official narrative. Most of these other theories are easy to debunk or disprove. Not many of them have the weight or the wealth of supporting data that the jungle theory seems to carry. And this would be a good time to reiterate that we do not dismiss the mainstream explanations in any way whatsoever. To us, it just makes more sense to look at each possibility comprehensively before just simply outright dismissing it with no research or patience whatsoever. And one more thing that needs to be clarified is that nobody who worked on or contributed to this video or the series believes that flight MH370 is that same plane that was shown in the Google Earth photo from part 1 and a few of the other videos. There seems to be a lot of confusion about that, especially in the video before the last video. But I mean, as we pointed out, that plane is actually along a confirmed, well-known, well-used flight path, which of course means that it is probably a completely different plane in mid-flight. And yeah, that doesn't mean that it's absolutely impossible, but it definitely suggests that it's very improbable. Remember though, many of these jungles in Southeast Asia are so vast, and I mean, they're just complete remote wilderness. And as others have pointed out, a plane might even be completely hidden from aerial view by the jungle canopy depending on the specific vegetation of the region. I mean, really what the jungle theory is trying to humbly ask is very simple, and that is just that, is it possible that flight MH370 may have come to its final resting place in one of these many dense jungles that are spread out all over the area? So, I mean, some of these jungles are extremely remote and difficult to get to. And the odds might be small, but if there's even a 1% chance, it just doesn't seem like that should be ignored. Okay, well, hopefully that little disclaimer helps clear things up a little bit on our point of view, but we will continue to look at several different MH370 theories and ideas, a lot of them even contradictory, but that doesn't mean that we're telling you to believe that. I mean, come on, obviously. By the time we get to end of all this, we might even find out that we have been inadvertently debunking all of this, but of course we won't know any of that until we get to the end and finish looking back at all the information. So we hope you guys come along with us for the ride and share your own theories and ideas as well. I mean, the more people we have looking at this, the better chance we have of finding some real answers. And Matthew pointed out something that I thought was genius, and that is, wouldn't it be interesting to see if that new LiDAR technology could be used somehow to search these expansive jungles for the aircraft? If you guys remember, or for anyone who doesn't know, that very same LiDAR technology was recently used to locate a massive lost Mayan civilization under the jungles of Guatemala that had been previously undiscovered for centuries. I mean, this could be very promising and a realistic technology to consider. Something I think that we can all agree on is that hopefully 2019 is finally the year. MH370 needs to be found as soon as possible, and we personally believe that the search should never end until it is found, even if that means private funding or crowdsourcing or just whatever it takes. And, well guys, we want to thank you again for your patience. We've added a second full-time creator to the channel, so we really think that will greatly speed up the research and editing process moving forward when making new videos. In theory, we should be able to move twice as fast. And because YouTube will not let us monetize at least 95% of our videos, both of us still have to maintain really crappy full-time jobs. Things have just been brutally busy for the last couple of months. But we will continue to make videos as frequently as humanly possible, even if it means that we have to keep working on them at night or after work, whatever it takes. We can't thank you guys enough for your support. Please don't forget to keep sending requests for what you'd like to see next. Pretty soon we'll probably put out another poll with a few of the more popular requests that we've been getting, so make sure to catch that if you want to vote on the next topic that we go over. We're working now with a lot of new and different subscribers and contributors on a ton of different interesting subjects, and a lot of that will be coming out very soon, so hopefully we will see you guys then. Peace!